Thanks everyone to show up today during your lunch break or breakfast or supper, depending on where you might be. As Warren was saying, today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through, just touch on the state of the art of natural language processing to address a lot of questions that we've been getting on our side, especially pertaining to what is the reliability of natural language processing, especially when it comes to a field that needs to be as diligent and as defensive as internal audit. As Warren was saying, if you have a question, Warren is going to be acting as the moderator. So please feel free to send a message in the chat, and we will take it from there. We're also going to reserve some time at the end to answer all the questions that we might have. And about, I would say, halfway, 2/3 through the presentation, we're also going to do a demo of the product itself. These presentations tend to go long because for some reason I like to talk quite a bit, especially in something as fascinating as natural language processing. So we will get through it fairly quickly. And also don't worry about the scope today. The goal is more to give you some background information about the key terms that are being used in the field of natural language processing. We're not going to delve into the math. We're just going to contextualize it and help make sense of it. So today's presentation, like I said, we were going to spend some time understanding a bit more of the background of the state of internal audit as well as the state of natural language processing. We're going to review what was the foundational concept of AuditMap and how we built it today and how our clients are using it. And then we're going to deep dive into the specific use cases as well as the platform demo and various versions of the front end that we were able to put together. So, what is the state of internal audit and natural language processing? As a lot of you are familiar with internal audit, some of you may have been internal auditors your entire career. Some of you may have been consulting auditors. Some of you might be involved into what's better known as the second lines of defense. So usually management level employees that are in charge of certain processes and procedures. But internal audit very much is focused on what constitutes the third line of defense, or what is now called the third line model. Internal audit over the last few years has shifted from being just internal, providing independent assurance, to providing independent assurance and advice to the rest of the organization. This means that the modern auditor does have a role and responsibility that pertains to participating in corporate success. What we mean by that is that if you see something, you should say something. If there is a risk that is raised in a report, then it is part of your responsibility to facilitate the fixing of that particular issue so that your company doesn't suffer from various issues or difficulties down the line. How we define risk and how the IA defines risk is defined as the potential impact of uncertainty on objectives. This means that there's two important things here. The first thing is you do have some internal objectives. Every company and every organization has some. It could be profit, it could be data privacy, it could be something specific like following key regulations. And what happens when a risk shows up, when there's a potential difficulty, is your ability to accomplish that particular objective is now put in question or in some sort of disarray. And your goal is to identify, track, and resolve all the risks that may come up so that you can help your organization succeed towards accomplishing its objectives. If you look at how you can actually assess a risk itself, you can define it as being the probability of something bad happening multiplied by the total damage. This type of risk model is very popular in ISO and in certain other risk management frameworks. And it comes in once in a while with the IAA, but really what we're concerned about today is being aware of the risk so that we can do something about it, therefore reducing the probability of it going bad. And risk mitigation, like we talked about, it's the ability to reduce what is the material threat of a particular risk so that you can help your organization accomplish its objectives. What we talk about with internal audit and modern internal auditing is risk-based decision making. What we want to do is not just show up to work and say, do we have the processes and procedures in place to mitigate against particular risks? We want to be aware and proactive towards the types of risks that show up so that we can do something about it. If you look at the risk-based decision making, the goal is to evaluate the risk profile of your organization in order to reduce the impacts and accomplish the objectives again. Assurance, independent confirmation, and confidence, something very relevant for internal auditors. What we've seen over the last few years in the field of internal audit is a shift from the control-based auditing process that was very, very popular in the past to say, these are the systems that I have in place, and are my systems effective? Are my systems working? Yes or no? And now that we're shifting to risk management based auditing, now we're looking at the effectiveness and the pertinence of the systems in place. Are they actually helping us accomplish what's going on? Do we have everything in place to make sure that we can succeed with our organization, especially with all the disruptions that have happened recently? So if you see the culture shift in how we built our tool, it's very much geared towards this risk management based approach to internal audit. A lot of people ask us, can you help us follow these cybersecurity procedures? Can you help us follow each one of these particular activities? And we always say yes, but to some extent. Our goal is very much to help advise our clients on what is the state of their organization so they can better their processes. Now, the difficulty with internal audit in this day and age is related to too much data. You have thousands of reports flying around. They all have different contexts. Each and every one of them have different scopes in terms of what they covered, what they didn't cover. They talk about certain teams and departments. And it's hard to make sense across the board of all the particular issues that may arise that may affect one department or another. You might do a cybersecurity audit, but the scope of the cybersecurity audit covered 5 of your 7 departments, and the other 2 have just never been addressed. How do you even go about investigating those particular questions is really the underlying motivation of our tool. We're going to touch on the design of our tool in just a second. Before, we need to talk about the state of the natural language processing. NLP is defined as the branch of computer science that analyzes language and the interaction of humans with it. It goes from analyzing the combination of certain words. So there's this popular theme that comes back in and out of NLP, which is, can I take the word Paris, subtract from it the word France, add to it the word Russia, and get Moscow? The answer is yes, because of the mathematics involved in language modeling. In the recent years, what we've seen is that NLP is quite powerful in using words and groups of words and understanding and contextualizing sentences. That's where the ability to quote unquote understand higher level ideas, understanding what a risk is, what a control is, what an objective is where we've seen progress being quite applicable to internal audit and enterprise risk. What are the advantages of using NLP as opposed to using a more traditional rules-based system? The first thing is resiliency. Even if you've never seen data, your tool will have a mechanism for dealing with it. So if I talk about cybersecurity quite a bit, and suddenly I talk about data security, databases, or security, all of those terms are related to cybersecurity, and therefore the models will have an opinion on the matter that is quite material. The other advantage is that if you look at the rules-based matching, typically internal auditors like to search for certain words like risk, issue, problem, material weakness, but there's a lot of ways of describing risk that don't include those particular words. So the ability to understand an entire sentence does make a big difference. The third thing The biggest one that we've seen is if you can analyze thousands of documents per hour, that means that you have the ability to now go through troves of data very, very quickly, very interactively, and ask multiple questions on the fly. So now it's a lot easier to get a sense of what has been assessed, what hasn't been assessed, and of the issues that are that have been brought up, what are the repeating patterns that need addressing immediately. We talked about sentence-wide analysis. And let's talk about why in 2021, the applicability of NLP to internal audit is actually quite successful. Since about 2013, 2014, there's been a lot of proof in the early neural network-based models to identify and classify sentences. They've been quite reliable, they've been quite capable and quite powerful. They've had some limitations around very large sentences of 30 to 40 words, typically the way that internal audit reports are written. In 2018, there was this new paper that came out claiming attention is all you need. Wonderful paper that brought this idea of transformers. And transformers, their advantage in NLP is they can look at the entire sentence at once. So they don't look at groups of words. They really get a sense of the position of the words, the grammar, the way the sentence is written, the styling, even the emphasis throughout the sentence changes depending on what the author is alluding to. And transformers are capable of understanding those changes and nuances. If you stayed up to date with NLP, you've also heard of BERT and all of the derivatives. And the BERT model is a very large representation of the English language that is easy to customize and adjust for particular issues like internal audit. And so what we've done with our platform is through the last few years, as we were using CNNs and LSTMs to collect risks, controls, and objectives, we've since migrated our platform to the latest and greatest technologies to be extremely resilient, flexible, and very capable in analyzing risks and internal audit reports within the modern IIA standards and other internal audit standards. What are the main advantages of this approach as opposed to, let's say, the more traditional internal audit processes? The biggest one that we've seen is the ability to compare risks across multiple concurrent frameworks. So your organization might prefer using COSO or COBIT 5, but what are your sustainability goals? Do you have the ability to compare your information against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Or what about trying to improve and modernize your process? Are you capable of using and implementing the top 10 risks as described by the IIA's Risk and Focus report, especially the one in 2021 that looked at crisis management globally, since the issues of, well, everyone's working from home. I don't need to go into detail on that one. But if you have the ability to compare different frameworks, you now have the ability to bring to light certain issues that weren't well contextualized in the past. That flexibility is not something that we've ever seen before in the field of internal audit, and that's how we built our platform. The idea behind AuditMap is quite simple, but we needed today's technology in order to implement it. The idea goes like this. If I have a team of people that goes through thousands of reports and I gave them 2-3 different color highlighters, will they be capable of identifying all of the risks and the controls that exist in those reports? The answer, if you've been in the internal audit world, is yes, eventually. What we're trying to do is accelerate and alleviate that key process, the ability to identify, to isolate, and to contextualize risk in a way for internal auditors. Usable by internal auditors means, how do I generate my audit plan? How do I prioritize next year's audit? How do I review last year's audit reports and try to be proactive around the documented, unmitigated risks that may arise? All of those particular issues require the same starting foundation, which is the ability to have my risks organized, sorted, and contextualized. If I have that information, it's very easy to move forward. Do I have the ability to ask the right questions by interacting with the data? Uh, we saw before that if I can put it in different buckets like the UN SDGs or COSO, then it's a lot easier to get those questions answered. And we also have the ability to have multiple workflows when it comes to data management. We've since launched our new API, which makes it quite interactive to retrieve the data. And we've also included a lot of front-end frameworks. And we've been working with one of our partners, Teammate, from Wolters Kluwer, to integrate back and forth with their data as well. So if you're in the internal audit space and you say, this idea sounds good, but how do I integrate it with the rest of my pipeline? Let's talk, because we've been working on SharePoint integration, Tableau integration, Teammate integration, and a few other mechanisms for moving the data back and forth. What do we consider a risk on our platform? This is really a key fact here when it comes to our ability to understand risk. Because we put in, under the risk label, we put 5 different types of sentences. We look at the drivers of risk, or the environmental conditions that may lead to a risk materializing. We have enterprise management and process level risks, or some people prefer to use strategic and operational risks, very similar in this regards. And the other one is recommendations. So if I brought to light past opportunities for improvement, then there's a good chance that if those opportunities for improvement are still unresolved, that this would be an issue going forward. Here's an example of drivers of risk that we like quite a bit. This is an example that we use in a lot of our demos, because there's a lot of weight associated with it. And if you're not a cybersecurity expert, it's hard to understand the full weight of this particular mention. So the sentence goes like this: employees seem to be unaware of the difference between confidential and anonymous. Well, that alludes to a lot of potential issues. If you're on the business side, you're thinking of this as, okay, well, there's obviously some training issues here that we need to resolve. But if you're on the cybersecurity side, all matter of data sovereignty, data agency, cybersecurity, database access, all of those are put in question with this one sentence. This is because the root cause that may cause a data breach is actually the team that you have in place may not be capable of fundamentally understanding the material danger of the types of data that you're bringing forward. And so it's very important to find this type of sentence, especially if you're doing any type of cybersecurity audit. For those interested, this was on the 2013 audit of travel administration from the Canadian federal government. Another fun one, process level risk, or like we talked about earlier, operational risk. We noticed that 25 of 32 reimbursements above $25,000 did not have a director's signature. Again, it's not directly tied to fraud, but if this risk exists, or this particular mention in the internal audit reports, we know that there's going to be a need to review the processes and procedures in place, especially surrounding financial oversight. It's quite important, if this one finding exists, to say what else might potentially go wrong if the people in charge of moving the money don't actually have the proper oversight to actually make this happen. And the last one, recommendations. This is a final one. Employees should really wash their hands after using the washroom. This is always obvious, but yeah, something worth reviewing always. Now, if I'm able to collect all of my risks, there's a few things that I can do. The easiest one, depending on your organization, you will either already have a risk and control matrix, you'll have a risk register, or you'll have some mechanism to try and evaluate what are all your historical risks. Because we have the ability to identify each and every one of the risks within the various reports that were raised, it's actually quite easy to regenerate on the fly your risk register. And if you're able to generate your risk register, one of the things that happens is it's up to date. It's very relevant and includes last year's reports. You're able to identify and prioritize the most relevant risk depending on your engagement, and you're able to add on top of it the specific risks that you think you should include as part of the scope. So we're going to talk quickly during the demo about one of the mechanisms to do so, but it's more important to know that if I have access to the entirety of the data and to all of the risks that exist, then I can actually move it forward quite easily and say, okay, let's export this list of risks. Let's make sure that we understand the context and the entities that are affected and what are the particular topics that have been raised, and from there on I'm able to make some changes. What are the benefits of using this type of approach and using an NLP based approach is, if you look at a typical audit cycle, we're talking a more traditional 12-month engagement where you have your planning of the engagement, you have the engagement itself, you have your reporting, and then you have your closeout or follow-on stages. What we notice is that clients tend to use our platform in very, very distinct phases, and it provides some material advantages. Where we talk about identifying the scope, if you need to review all of your historical reports manually, that is very cumbersome. You may forget certain risks that you've seen. We've had clients, especially early clients, complain about that being the reason why they purchase our tool. And it might be difficult to also understand what's missing, what isn't in the reports. So being able to define the scope is very much accelerated by using our tool. We can't do the interviews for you, so that's always going to be up to the auditors. And since our platform is looking to alleviate and accelerate, then that should be no surprise that the human elements are still quite present. In terms of key risk isolation, one of the things that we've seen our clients do is that they can say, they can filter, then sub-filter, then sub-filter the risks to get a good understanding of what are the dangers that exist with their upcoming engagement. So if I can understand what are the particular risks within cybersecurity that also affects HR, that is within the last 3 years, and that may include some reports that mention certain business functions, then I know that those are extremely material and relevant to my upcoming engagement. Control data collection, depending on your processes and automation, that's going to be easier or harder, but typically we don't do a big change here. We'll look to integrate some of the data, but those are custom plays. On risk-based testing, though, because you have the list of historical risks, because you have the list of the past results that were brought to light, then you're not guessing what are the controls that need testing. You have the actual results from the early years, so you can go straight in and say, let's see if we can reproduce those results or if we've actually seen a change. The last part, when it comes to follow-up and assurances, it loops in quite neatly with the scope definition to say, what did we try to do, and did we accomplish what we were trying to do? Then the automated review using AI makes things a whole lot easier. And Warren, I'm just going to do a quick check in here. Are there any questions at this point?
Not as of yet. So yeah, this is a good time to check in before we do a live demonstration of the AuditMap platform. If you have any questions, by all means, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and at the end of the demo of the platform, we can unmute you so you can ask your questions directly. So
Great. So let's talk about some of the example use cases. We're going to first talk about identifying the indicators of risk that may arise from historical reports. We're going to also look at the absence of documentation, and we're going to do a full program assessment. When it comes to flagging indicators of risk, there's two key sentences that that are important here. So the one that we talked about earlier, employees seem to be unaware of the difference between confidential and anonymous, and a second one, which is the audit team was unable to confirm destruction due to lack of historical information on two projects. Those are two risks that are very important to review, and you want to be able to contextualize them. So as we hop into the platform, we'll show how to retrieve context pertaining to these particular sentences. Then, when we look at absence of documentation, the way our tool is built is it has multiple views, and we work with our clients to either include or expand the number of views based on their particular reality. We've been working with one client on including geographic view because a lot of their clients are various countries from around the world. It's important for them to evaluate the types of risks and risk trends against the various countries. So when you're talking about absence of documentation, it's just as important to understand what are the particular risks that were identified and what were the areas within your organization that weren't specifically addressed over the last few years. And the third one, this is something that we're going to touch on very, very quickly, is going to be how would I, as an external auditor, hypothetically going to a government department, actually do an internal audit review of the benefits payments that came up last year. So CEBA and CERB, for those of you that are outside of Canada, are two benefit programs that came about with the COVID relief packages. And what they identified is a lot of those benefit payments and the processes surrounding them were actually copies of existing processes. And so our recommendation to our tentative client at that time was actually review all of the historical reports against the existing benefits programs and try to evaluate if the risks that exist there are also applicable to their present scope. So let's go back to the first one, and we're just going to switch here. So we're going to start off by looking at some of the benefits programs. So what I have here in our tool after I logged in is our tool has already ingested, I believe this is 47 reports as part of this specific engagement. And there's a few things that I'm just going to browse through quickly for those of you that are new to our platform, and then I'm going to contextualize the information. So our tool does include the ability to be hosted on premise. We are actually pursuing our SOC 2 compliance right now for those of you that want to keep using it in the cloud. And we do have a few other mechanisms in place to make sure that your data is secure, and typically we'll work with you to understand what is the level of confidentiality or criticality of the data so that it never leaks. The way our platform is built is there's an AI module that runs in the background, there's an API, and then there's the front end. And what we're talking about today is just the front end and the ease of navigation. The view that I have in front of me is one of our standard views that we build for our clients that comes out of the box. So this is just the ability to organize and navigate risks and controls that rose in the past. Like I was saying before, this is financial reporting and controls. We've ingested data from 2012 to 2018. These were all benefits payments from the various government departments that included some payments directly to individuals and organizations, with the goal to understand what are the payment issues that came up in those various programs, to understand, is there something that I need to know as I'm evaluating these new programs as an auditor. If you look here, we have basic filtering, we have our prescribed risk management frameworks. This one is COSO, I believe. It's been a long day, so if it's COBIT, don't laugh at me. I always mix up those two because I've been working so closely with the UN SDGs and the IAA RIF, so I'll need to do my own refresher on this. But here's what we're going to do. I have my list of risks right now. There's quite a bit, 1362, and I still remember that my goal is to filter out of all the risks, try and find the relevant risks that are pertinent to my specific engagement. When I look at these types of risks, there's a lot of information here, but let's say one of them pops to my attention. I want to be able to contextualize it. And I want to be able to understand what's going on. So let's click here. There we go. It's expanding. And so I know, how does this sentence actually exist in the rest of the data? Is this a risk that is worth saving? Is this a risk that is worth continuing to investigate? I know the file in which it exists, so I can get the file summary if I want. I know what are the similar statements within the rest of the data set. So if I click similar statements, these are all risks that allude to the similar types of issues that existed in the past. So this type of risk navigation is not something that you've seen in the other EGRC platforms, just because of the nature of NLP and internal audit. But we believe that the ability to navigate these risks effectively makes things a whole lot easier when it comes to understanding what's there and what's not there. Now, let's say, like I said before, I'm concerned about payments to individuals. So let's do a quick search for payment. And now as I go down, I have 45 risks that have been identified by our platform that also includes the word payment in them. If I'm starting an engagement, how long does it typically take me to identify all of the historical risks across 47 reports that directly tie to payment? We've automated that specific process. That is one thing that is worth remembering here, is the specific type of alleviation that we were able to provide. So let's see if there's any quick questions so far. So Jay Tirado, does the tool include the feature of sharing risk trends other clients are generating, and so one can compare and contrast with other companies? Very important question, because if you're an internal auditor, the one thing you don't want is your data leaking in any way, shape, or form. Our tool does not allow the ability to export the information across different clients. So once the client does have the data, there's nothing that we can we will never retrieve that data and share with other people, because the data is very much theirs. However, if you're an internal auditor for an organization, there's a few questions that you want to know to help prioritize your new year. First off, what are the risk trends in my industry? What are the risk trends across the entire market? What are the risk trends that the IIA might be alluding to? Each and every one of those mechanisms, what we've been doing is working with our clients to integrate either all of the risks coming up from the Securities and Exchange Commission, so all of the public filings. We've scraped all of the data from all the filings over the last 10 years, I believe. So if you're in financial services and you want to understand what is a typical risk landscape for participants in this industry, you can retrieve that and compare your internal audit reports to that. If you want to know what are the risk trends as a whole or similar risks across the industry, we do have access to that data as well. When it comes to additional models or additional filtering mechanisms, we do support those. But I would say that the important takeaway is the ability to compare your organization to industry risk trends is where we're seeing 2021 being providing the most value through our tool. So you can both ingest the data and compare the data. It's going to be quite capable. So that covers that little sidebar. Now, looking at the specific types of workflows that you might want to pursue, what we've done is we built with our clients and as part of our platform, the ability to generate a risk and control matrix on the fly. So we can include coverage gaps, we can include other mechanisms. But very simply put, if you're trying to create a very quick, almost back of the napkin style risk and control matrix for you to help prioritize your engagement, then we know that using our tool with filtering mechanisms is so much easier and so much more comfortable rather than try to spend the how can I put this? What we've seen with companies is their risk and control matrix is usually like 150 by 200 controls, and it's this work of art by one of the internal audit managers or by another internal audit director, and that removes the ability and the flexibility from internal auditors to be very, very dynamic. All concepts of continuous auditing, agile auditing are kind of put up in the air by how stringent this risk and control matrix is. So instead, what we propose with our tool is the ability to regenerate those risk and control matrices quite quickly. So I've already selected as part of my search criteria the specific risks that I was interested in as part of this data set. Then I'm able to identify what are the material controls that I also want to evaluate as part of this audit process. The additional insights, so observations, findings, and recommendations that were raised also in the past, we're including those in the conversation. And now I confirm and I can relate. So the goal here is for you to remain effective as an internal auditor. You want to assess what are the key controls that I'm trying to evaluate their effectiveness, what are the key risks that are motivating this particular research, and what is the additional context that I need to keep an eye on when I'm doing this particular review. So this is one mechanism and one workflow that we have in place. There are some much more complex ones that we're working on. So for instance, the ability to export the risk register from our tool onto Teammate, if you have that installed, if you have your the data access API on their side, then we have a mechanism for transferring the data, and that leads to much more capable, distributed, multi-person team audit reviews. But I would say that the risk and control matrix here is quite analogous. It's the same representation, the same proxy of how would you actually go about identifying the risks that you think are important as part of the engagement. Now, just looking at the time here, I think we have time for one other quick demo. And we also talked about the program assessments. We didn't touch on the absence of documentation, so I will touch on that very, very quickly. So if I look at CRA here on our particular view, so I know that the CRA is mentioned 198 times across my documentation. Here's what's interesting. The CRA does have a few interesting benefits programs, and for those of you outside of Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, or CRA, is like the Canadian IRS. They are both the tax collectors and also the first and last access points for most of the benefits programs. So a lot of the programs are administered by other departments, but a lot of the payment monitoring happens through the CRA. So if you're doing a program assessment, you want to review what is the involvement of the CRA within those particular engagements. So we included with this data set the same types of reports, a bit of a shorter window here, but now I can see, 61 references in 2015, almost 79 reports in 2016, and then a big drop to 2017 down to 25 reports. So my question is, am I looking at the entirety of the information? Do I have all of the data on hand as an auditor to provide the independent assurance and advice that is expected of me? The first thing I'm going to do before I go into the engagement and try to review the risk is I'm going to try to evaluate, why is there a drop between 2016 and 2017 for the specific department that is important as part of this program review? If I'm looking at a pile of reports, it's very difficult to get a sense of this information. But this simple graph, one of the basic visualizations that we included, makes it a lot more comfortable for you as a user to be able to ask those types of questions. Now, I am looking at the clock. I believe we're going to start opening some questions and opening the floor up for questions. But just before I do so, I just wanted to provide a quick summary of what we talked about today. We looked at what is the state of natural language processing and its applicability to internal audit, as well as its reliability, as shown by some of the risks that we were able to provide on our platform. We've shown also how is our platform designed to leverage the latest AI trends in internal audit and make it and make the actual algorithms quite abstracted and removed from the user, so that you, the internal auditor, the risk manager, can spend more time interacting with the data and going back to doing your job as quickly as possible. And we've walked through a few key examples on how would you actually go about using our platform to address some of the key internal audit expectations and activities that the modern internal auditor is expected to achieve each and every week, month, year. It's going to happen faster and faster for those of you that are in the field right now. I'm sure you've had some expectations around, oh, my two biggest clients just suffered a data breach, and the CEO is calling me right now asking me, what is our cybersecurity exposure? So hopefully you've never had something like that in the past. We've had a few clients that came up to us and said, yeah, that's one of the horror stories that they come up with. And if they had had our tool, they would have gotten so much faster to be able to review that.
Yeah. So
anyways, that's it from me.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left, so I figured maybe it's a good time to jump in. If there's any questions, by all means, anybody can raise their hand and ask some questions. Keep in mind too that we'll send out the presentation afterwards, so you get an opportunity to just review it or review it with your team. But in addition, if there's more in-depth, scope or ideas you have behind internal audit using artificial intelligence, using NLP. This would be a great opportunity to reach back out afterwards, and we can do individual demos as well. So if anybody has any questions, by all means, raise your hand and we can open up the chat.